audition?
I sent him sides,
Yeah.
which are, scenes to read on tape and explained to him the whole process. And then after a couple days, he wrote back and said, "Sorry, I'm in the middle of a world championship." But I was always impressed with him and how serious he was, how polite he was, how humble he was, just wanting to learn about the process. So when I kind of came up with the idea of this film, I reached out to Louis first and said, I basically just sent him an email and said, "I want to make the most authentic racing film of all time. Will you help me?" And luckily he said yes.
Yeah.
So then I went straight to Jerry and said, "Will you help me?" And Jerry said yes. And then we went and got Brad. And then we went and got Aaron Kruger, who was one of the writers on Top Gun. And then we had a team, to start putting this together. And that was almost exactly 4 years ago.
Wow.
That this all started. So now we're here.
Now you're here. And you got the buy-in from F1, which I imagine was not an easy feat. How did that conversation start, and what was it like to get them to essentially say, not only can you get this unprecedented access into this world and tell this story, but so much so that we're going to let you shoot during races around the world?
Sure. It took us almost 2 years to convince Formula One that we will help the sport rather than hurt the sport. It's a sport that travels around the world. It's very successful. It's not as successful here, but it will become successful because of the movie. And there are 3 races here now, and previously there was only one, right? So, only one race in the U.S. So what happened is Joe was very clever in how he did it. We brought Brad Pitt with us to meet with the head of F1. and that, you get their attention, at least you can get past the secretary to see the head of F1. And Joe, what also he did is he showed them Top Gun 3 months before it came out on that trip. And so they could see what we could do for the Navy. Their recruiting went way up after the movie came out. But he also did something else that was very clever. He took how he made Top Gun, we didn't have all the jets, obviously. We didn't have the Russian jets. F-14s weren't flying anymore. So he took the F-18 and skinned it to the various different jets. And then he took a race section of an F1 race and inserted a car that we were going to build in that race so they could see how we could incorporate our car in their races. And that they had a big smile on their face when they saw that. Then that was one part of it. Then there were 10 teams, and Joe and Brad and myself had to talk to every single team to tell them they're not going to be the villain. And Red Bull was for sure going to be the villain in their minds because Lewis was on Mercedes, and there was a huge competition between those 2 teams. So they were convinced that they were going to be the arch enemy of Brad Pitt, and they were going to lose at the end. But thanks to Joe and Brad, we finally convinced them that it was going to be smooth. And they kept seeing us around the racetracks because what happened is we shot for 4 days, and then were hit by 2 strikes. The actors went out and the writers went out. So what Joe did, very fortunate for the movie, is he traveled to all 9 races and filmed all the second unit. Rather than having a second unit director, Joe did it all. And then we came back a year later and shot it with the actors. So this movie took 2 years to film. But you know what? What you saw, and it's exciting, but you know what makes it all work? Is the characters and the writing and the story. Unless you have a great screenplay, and Aaron Kruger wrote our screenplay, and he had some help when he wasn't available with some other great writers who came in and helped us. That emotion is what gets you and what makes the film so successful. And Joe is somebody who was trained as an architect and an engineer. So when he approaches something, it has to be technically perfect. He designed cameras that had never been used before that Sony made for us. And Apple gave us one of their iPhone cameras, an enhanced version of it, and put it in 2 cars in every single race. So our editor had 8,000 hours.
5,000 hours of footage.
5,000 hours of footage to go through to make what you just saw. So the technical expertise between Claudio Miranda, who did the cinematography, he designed a camera along with Joe that pans remotely. So when you saw a car next to Brad and panning to Brad's face, that's all real. That was actually done on the racetracks. So the technical things that were done on this were miraculous. They had 16 camera angles around the car, which I told you earlier, 4 at a time. So the racing was just as authentic as it possibly could be. And then as the teams kind of leaned in, we got some of the drivers to participate in the movie. You saw some of the real drivers in the film. And then people asked me, Jerry, were you able to get in one of those cars and drive one of those cars? They mold the seat to your body. You can't get in one of those cars. It takes an F2 driver a month to be able to get in an F1 car. That's how difficult they are to drive. What they're hitting 5 Gs in those corners, their necks get beat up. Brad and Damson were training every single day, so between going 180 miles and then breaking down to 50, so your foot has to be, your leg has to be really strong, your neck has to be really, I mean, it was really a difficult movie for them to make, but they loved it, and that's why they trained for 4 months on a program that Joe and Brad kind of designed with one of the F2 drivers, who was one of our stunt guys.
Wow. You know, Jerry just talked about, you know, it all starts with a great story and a great script. How did you decide what your entry point was going to be to tell this story? I mean, you obviously knew that you wanted Brad Pitt early in the development, I guess, of this project, but how did you decide how you're going to get into and tell this story?
I was actually inspired by the documentary series Drive to Survive, and like a lot of people during COVID, I watched it, you know, binge watched it in a day, and the first season, they did not, you know, Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes did not want to participate in the show because they didn't know how they were going to be portrayed. And you'd think that'd be a disaster when all the popular teams say we don't want to be any part of it. So the series was forced to focus on the last place team and on drivers that no one had ever heard of.
Yeah.
And that aspect is what really hooked me in, because I was like, that's what this should be, the story. This should be about the story of the team that loses every weekend, the driver that you've never heard of, the rookie that's, you know, finally made it to Formula One, but is in a slow car. So how are they going to stand out? How do you excel when the car is slower than the one that, you know, everyone else is driving? And the idea of an underdog story was my kind of entryway in, and Sonny Hayes as well, being a kind of a washed up has-been, you know, this idea of someone who was supposed to be the next great thing, and one little incident in life kind of derails it, and snatches that dream away, and he's given one more shot to come back. You know, I saw this movie as a kid called The Natural with Robert Redford.
Yes.
Okay.
I thought that when I first saw this, actually.
Yeah, so
reminded me of
that I think, you know, that's one of those movies I saw as a kid and I think was kind of deeply ingrained, and it's one of my favorite Robert Redford performances. And I think Brad and Redford, there's a lot of similarities, you know, just in kind of their performance style and their taste. So there's definitely some Roy Hobbs in Sonny Hayes. Hoosiers was another movie that we talked about a lot. Gene Hackman, you know, plays a coach who's had, you know, an incident that kind of allows him not to, you know, he can't coach anymore, and he comes back with this team. So those were kind of the movies that inspired, I guess, the style. It is a sports movie, but then put it in the world of modern Formula One, which is just fascinating and so much more sophisticated, really, than anything even that I saw while I was making Top Gun.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Working on Top Gun, I thought, you know, standing on an aircraft carrier deck and watching 2 F-18s take off simultaneously would be the coolest thing I would ever be witness to. And then I walked into the Formula One garage and watched Lewis, you know, I watched the mechanics build a car in front of me, Lewis climb in it, become one with it, and rock it out of the garage. And I was like, I gotta make a movie in this world. It's just so amazing. And so that's what we did.
And you know, something that I heard you say, because I was completely unfamiliar. I've been to some NASCAR races before, but never, you know, an F1 race. So I was completely unfamiliar with this aspect, but the idea that this is probably the only sport where you compete against your own teammate had to also be kind of a I was gonna say layup, but wrong sport, for storytelling for you, yeah.
Conflict is drama.
Yeah,
And I think for our screenwriter, Aaron Kruger, that was something that hooked him in because I knew the type of story and I knew these characters I wanted to build. But Aaron's the one who hooked into that unique thing about this sport, and that was the spark he needed to write a screenplay. And I just can't tell you how complicated this screenplay was to write. I mean, the most important thing, like Jerry was saying, is you have to create these compelling characters. You have to tell this emotional journey. But at the same time, we're writing a Formula One movie that Lewis Hamilton is going to read and analyze, and be a part of. So it has to be authentic. Every single detail had to be right. And Aaron and myself and all of us really had to just immerse ourselves in this sport completely for a couple years to figure out how the sport worked and then how to kind of put it on the screen.
I was gonna ask both of you, what was your awareness of F1 before you dove headfirst, I think, into this project? Were you guys fans of the sport before, or were you having a lot of discovery as you were developing the story?
For me, it really was discovering while making it. I grew up here in the United States where it's hard to get the Formula One broadcasts, especially when I was growing up. I'd watch the Indy 500, every year, but Formula One isn't something I grew up with like they do in Europe. How about you, Jerry?
Growing up in Detroit, I was always into cars, so that was
There's some Detroiters in the house?
embedded in my DNA. But I was never part of NASCAR or F1. But what's great about what we do and what we give to you is we get to look inside these sports and show you how they actually work and then give it to an audience. So it's what we call a process film. We take you inside a world you'll never be a part of, and we show you how it works and in a dramatic way. And this movie is, according to F1 and the drivers, very authentic. So you're getting a phenomenal look into the world of F1.
Yeah, and let's stay there with that authenticity, because that's something that you obviously are known for as a producer, which is really pushing, the realm of authenticity. Like, bring us there. Like, how did you start with this? Because there are a lot of scenes, obviously, in this film where you feel like you're literally in the driver's seat, but also even outside of the cars, you just feel like you're there. And if you're not there, you probably want to go there immediately and watch this in person. So where did you start with that? And what was your guiding principle essentially for that?
On which?
On how to really bring this level of authenticity that you guys brought in F1.
Well, we embedded ourselves. I mean, Formula One let us. We built our own garage. We were the 11th team on 9 different races, and we had our own garage, which some of the designers of the other teams' garages came and looked at ours and said, "I'm going to get fired because ours looks so good." So Joe had designed, along with our production designer, this phenomenal garage. We also, built 6 cars. We had Mercedes, and Joe designed the car, and then we got F2 engines and put an F1 body over the F2 engine, and the car was going 180 miles an hour, and they were driving it, and then they're braking at 50 miles an hour. So it's a really grueling sport. When these real drivers climb out of a car after a race, they lose 10 pounds. I mean, that is how difficult this sport is. And by us being a part of it and a part of that world and living it for 2 years with the team principals and with the drivers, hearing all their stories, hanging out with Lewis Hamilton and being a part of their world for 2 years, we really, and Aaron Kruger, lived with them. He went to all these races, listened to all what the drivers had to say, incorporated it into the script. Everything that you see in this movie actually happened in a race somewhere in the last 10 years. Even the huge crash that Joe did is based on a crash. Who was it, Grosjean? Yeah.
Well, it was a combo. There was a Formula 3 crash at that same corner in Monza about 8 years ago where he flipped into the fence, and then, the fire was more inspired by Grosjean, which was 2 years ago. But people say to me, why don't you use Formula 1 cars?
Yeah.
Because we say we use Formula 2 cars.
Yeah.
A Formula 1 car costs $250,000 a day to run.
Wow.
And requires 30 people to start it.
Wow.
a Formula 2 car, which is only about 10 seconds slower per lap or around a Formula 1 track, costs $25,000 a day and requires 2 people to start it.
Oh, wow.
So,
That was an easy decision.
So that was something that Toto Wolff told me, and he said, don't start with a movie car and try to make it fast. He says, start with a real race car and then modify it so it works for your filming. So that's exactly what we did. We bought 6 Formula 2 cars. We brought them to the Mercedes F1 factory. They lengthened them 200 millimeters. They redesigned all the aero on it so it looked just like an F1 car. And then we built the camera recorders, the transmitters, and the batteries all into the floor of the car, and just had the sensor of the camera and the lens up on a tiny little box in front of the driver. So we had 4 of those at a time, and we had 16 different positions. But these cars were literally designed for making this film. So we had custom cameras and custom cars, and like Jerry said, we had the world of Formula One advising us and helping us along the way, which was incredible.
I know, that was amazing. Let's get even more super nerdy. When you guys are filming at the races, we're not seeing you guys in the midst of a race. Like, how are you navigating? Because you're doing it basically when there's pauses or breaks, or how does that?
Yeah, so that's the kind of Hollywood magic trick we're doing. So when you see Brad and Damson driving in this movie, they're driving our cars on the F1 track during the race weekend, but they're driving it between practice and qualifying sessions. So there's 100,000 or 150,000 people in the stands. They're driving in the same track that the pro drivers were driving on 10 minutes before, but we had the track to ourselves for about 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay.
Then you combine that with, we shot the races as well. We had our own cameras on 2 or 3 F1 cars during the race, and then we also had all 25 broadcast cameras. We were recording all of that as well, and we had one of our cameras in the helicopter. And what we did was we intercut that footage so that you're seeing real race footage intercut with footage of Brad and Damson driving on the same track, and then using the magic of visual effects, we would change one of the F1 cars into an Apex car when we needed it to be an Apex car, and when we're with Brad and Damson, we would put the other F1 cars around them digitally. So it's one of those movies where we worked very hard to be so seamless in that integration that you can't tell what's real or isn't. But I'm excited for when when the VFX breakdown reel comes out, and we can start to show you just how that magic trick happens. But it gives you the feeling of being, that Brad and Damson are in these races.
Absolutely. Before I let you guys go, this may be the most difficult question that I've asked for the night, but favorite race that you guys shot at, or favorite experience that you had at a race? Like, what was that moment? Like, put us there.
For me, it's probably the last thing we shot,
Okay.
and it was only in December, so it's only,
Not even a year old.
9 months ago.
Okay.
Was shooting the podium scene in Abu Dhabi, which we shot right after the race ended. And so in front of all that crowd, it literally was the end of the movie. We had been working together for 2 years. It was probably our most high pressure situation, because I knew we'd probably have 1 or 2 takes to shoot the most important scene of the film.
Yeah.
George Russell was very anxious to spray Brad with champagne, so I had to beg him not to do it on the first take, because then we'd be done. So he did on take 2, which is the one that's in the film. But just, I think the pressure and watching our whole crew come together in that moment, the performance that Brad gives in that moment, which I think was a real genuine, knowing it was the end of the film and it was the end of this journey and playing this character, but being able to pull that performance off in that moment with all that pressure, and just standing there on the podium on the other side and seeing that all happen, that was definitely one of those experiences I'll never forget.
Love that. Jerry, how about yourself?
I think for me, it was when we finally got our actors back, and we were at Silverstone, which is about a couple hours outside of London. And just watching Brad get inside the car and drive in front of 140,000 people, just to be there. Silverstone is like the home of F1, and it's like a circus. There are hundreds of thousands of people camping out for that weekend. It takes 3-4 hours to get there. It's like their Super Bowl. And just that we went through this enormous journey to get this movie made, and Joe shot for a year already. We finally have our actors back, and we put him in the car, and now I felt, hey, we're really making a movie now.
I love that. Please, another round of applause for sharing your show. Continued success, gentlemen. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, everybody.